The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Omis Hirschman. I'm Director of Performing Arts here at the 92nd Street Y, and I bring you regards from Laura Kaminsky, who directs the Humanities program here, and who, of course, for those of you who were here last week, did greet you last week. Well, she sends you greetings from sickbed. We all wish her well. The format tonight, following my introductory remarks, will have Tim Page, our moderator, and Gerard Schwartz, our guest, engage in a conversation for about an hour's duration. Following their talk, you, the members of the audience, will be invited to ask questions. Mr. Page will recognize you one at a time, and if you stand while speaking, your question will be more clearly heard by all. That is an admonition directly from Laura Kaminsky, and you better be careful to follow it. Now, to begin with, I'd like to introduce Tim Page, who also has a cold. He's been the moderator for the first and will be the moderator for all four of these conductors' symposia, if you like. He is currently a music critic for the New York Times, and he's host of a daily radio program broadcast over radio station WNYC entitled Old, New, and Unexpected. He is also host and producer of a new nationally syndicated radio program, Meet the Composer. In 1984, the Glenn Gould Reader was published by Knopf. It's a book that's edited by Mr. Page. I have it at home. I enjoyed it very, very much. It includes his own introduction and a reprint of one of his interviews with the late pianist. From 1979 to 82, Mr. Page was the classical music editor of the Soho News, and I think that's the first time we met at that time. Since then, he's been a regular contributor to the New York Times, often reviewing, oh my God, as many as 13 performances per week. I think we'll stop there. That's quite a lot. Now, Gerard Schwartz. I was going to go through a lengthy history of Gerard Schwartz's accomplishments from the time I first remember him as co-principal first trumpet of the New York Philharmonic. I knew that he had been a conductor in those earlier years of the Elliott Feld Ballet, for the Eric Hawkins Dance Company, a variety of other endeavors. And now, I think it is only about 10 years since I've met Gerard Schwartz, and the easiest thing for me to do, by the way, he doesn't have a cold. The easiest thing for me to do is to read two paragraphs from a recent biography. Principal conductor, this is 10 years after, of the Seattle Symphony Orchestra since 1984, Mr. Schwartz leads the orchestra for 16 weeks during the current season. In addition, he marks his 9th year as music director of the Y Chamber Symphony, his 8th as music director of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. This summer, he celebrated his 11th season as music director of the Waterloo Festival in New Jersey, and he has led 14 concerts at Lincoln Center's Mostly Mozart Festival, where he has been music director since 1984. If I recollect, he was named music advisor 2 years earlier than that. And he was most recently featured on Mostly Mozart's first appearance on the Live from Lincoln Center series, which was broadcast nationally over PBS. During the 1985-86 season, the current one, Gerard Schwartz has many European engagements, and he will be at the IRCAM Center in Paris. He will conduct in Monte Carlo, Helsinki, Madrid with the London Symphony Orchestra in both London, and has recently come from performances there in East Berlin with the London Symphony. In January, he appears at the Seattle Opera conducting 5 performances of Mozart's Così fan tutte. Now that's really an extraordinary accomplishment for what is a growth since his first, I suppose, post of a major orchestra some 10 or so years ago. He has been, to my mind, the most sensible, sensitive, and at the same time aggressive champion of new music. Ladies and gentlemen, Gerard Schwartz and Tim Page.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back here at the 92nd Street Y, even though I must say I wish my voice was in better shape. Or I not only have a cold, but we're in the middle of one of those necessary evils down at WNYC, which is called Fundraising Week. And as a result, I've been on the air all day giving out a phone number for people to call. And all I have going through my mind is 285-9400 again and again and again. I will spare you that tonight, however. We're going to be talking again, like the last time with Lucas Foss, about the business, the duties, the difficulties, the rewards of being a conductor. I guess the first thing which comes to my mind is that you are, at least to the best of my knowledge, one of the only people, perhaps the only person, who has managed to completely make a shift from being a distinguished soloist on an instrument, the trumpet, being certainly one of the best in the world, to being a conductor in such a very short time. What interests me is whether you had, back in the days when you were dazzling us with American Brass Quintet and in your solo work, any special thought in the back of your mind that you would one day want to be a conductor. And I guess the question is twofold, because I'd also like to know how it feels to have been really at the top of one profession and then just really given it up. I mean, there are soloists who have gone on to conduct. Yehudi Menuhin, I think, conducts about half the time and plays violin half the time, and the same sort of percentage holds true, I believe, for Mstislav Rostropovich. But you actually just gave it up suddenly at the absolute height of the career. So I'd just be curious as to the nature of your odyssey and when you first saw that this was going to be the way it was.
Well, when I was playing the trumpet, I really didn't want to be a conductor. I mean, I was pushed into it quite often. I conducted for a number of dance companies, sometimes only out of self-defense, so I wouldn't have to play with someone else. And I started working with Elliot Feld really because I was conducting for him in the recording studios, and he then asked me to be his music director. So my career as a conductor really began from the late teens when I was conducting for the dance companies, Eric Hawkins and then Elliot Feld. But in fact, I stopped doing that pretty much because I wanted to be a great trumpet player, and I couldn't do both. Even then, at the age of 22, 23, the conducting was taking too much time away from the playing, and I couldn't stay in great shape and continue to grow as an instrumentalist while I had to spend so much time studying scores and dealing with problems that a conductor has to face. So I, in fact, gave up conducting for Eric Hawkins, and in those days I got my colleague from Juilliard, Dennis Davies, to take my place. And I continued to do Elliot's stuff, but again, most of that was at that time then in the recording studio. It wasn't so much on tour the way Eric was. So my whole direction was to be an instrumentalist. Now, was it ever in the back of my mind that I really was going to be a conductor? I used to always say no, that it was never in the back of my mind. But as I think about it more, I'll tell you something that, I don't know how amusing it is, but it's absolutely true. From the time I was a little kid, my mother said I was going to be a conductor. She said that when she was pregnant, that she thought I was going to be a conductor. So when I became a trumpet player, needless to say, my mother was not terribly thrilled. And she always told me I was going to be a conductor, and I said, no, I'm going to be a trumpet player. And I was a typical rebellious son. And the more she said I was going to be a conductor, the more I said I was going to be a trumpet player. So I don't know whether in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I wouldn't have minded so much, but I was so dead set on doing the opposite of whatever she said, even though I love my mother, naturally. That, in my rebellious way, I said, no, there definitely wasn't, I would not be a conductor. Eventually, thank God for me, I changed my mind. And I decided to become a conductor. What is it like to be at the top of one's profession? In a way, I was. Not that I couldn't have been better. not that I wouldn't have been a better player. I felt that I was approaching some way of playing that I was looking for, that I really feel I could have been better.
Well, you were the first trumpet in the New York Philharmonic at what age?
25, 26.
That's...
Yeah. But I had a vision of what the trumpet should sound like, and the kind of vibrancy the sound should have, and I was really getting it. I was trying to make it sound like a violin without it really being a violin, with that kind of intensity and the kind of vibrato that violinists use or flute players used. I remember when I was quite young, I was doing a film track for a movie, and it was a piece for flute, woodwind quintet, flute solo with woodwinds, guitar, and trumpet. And the flute player was Julie Baker, who was the first flute in the New York Philharmonic. And he'd play this 16-bar phrase, and then I'd play it with the same accompaniment. Then he would play it. Then that was the way this film went. They threw the music out, actually, before the film came out because it was terrible, and they got someone else to write some other music. So I never actually heard it, except on the playbacks in that studio. And I remember I was 19 then, and I listened to it, and I thought to myself, God, I want to get that sound, that intensity of the quality of the sound that Julie was able to get that I couldn't get. Julie and I became very close friends at that moment, and we remained that way to this day, but certainly those years I was in the New York Philharmonic. I was striving for something, and when I quit, I was 30, I'm not sure, I think I was probably about 34 when I quit playing, and I was getting there. But I had stopped worrying about it when I was about 32 or 31, 32, because I knew then already that I was on my way to becoming a conductor, and I wasn't striving to accomplish something else on the instrument. So yeah, I was close to being towards the top of my field, and I might have been really at the top someday, and I just stopped. And yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do, to actually be somewhere where you have respect and you've accomplished something, and self-respect, and then all of a sudden be like so many people were, oh, you have the conductor bug, or you're going to be a conductor now, you were such a great player, why would you want to be a rotten conductor, a mediocre conductor, or whatever I was going to be in those days. And I can understand that. I understand it very well. I would never say that myself to anyone. If someone comes to me and says, great instrumentalist or otherwise, I'd like to be a conductor, all I will ever say is, I wish you well. We need desperately good conductors in the world. There's a great need for good conductors everywhere, anywhere. There are not many good conductors, but there's a great need for them. If a guy has a gift and he thinks he can do it, I'll encourage him like crazy, because we need more people in the field. It's one of the few fields where there isn't an overpopulation. There is on a lower level, but not on a high level, certainly. Anyway, it was very difficult for me to make that move, and I had to have a great deal of trust in what I could possibly someday do as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever, on days off, if you ever have days off, sit down and just say, well, I'm going to play through some of my old trumpet favorites and break out the trumpet and just play?
No, never.
Can you at this point?
No, I can't. I could play a couple notes. I could probably play for maybe a minute or two. I'm sure I could, only slow, but no, I can't. I don't even have a trumpet, so it's...
Do you miss it at all?
Oh yeah, playing the trumpet was a wonderful experience. You know what, it's like a singer. A singer, the sound comes from, in a sense, from within. You make the sound yourself. And the trumpet, it was close to that. Your lip vibrates and it makes the sound, and it's like a language you speak. It's something that, of course you miss.
Who do you now look on as your teachers as a conductor? Did you ever really study conducting formally? Was it basically a hands-on experience? Do you look back on playing with, you work with Mr. Boulez at the Philharmonic. I don't remember. Were you still in the Philharmonic when Mr. Maida was there?
No.
I thought so. Who do you look on as teachers during this time?
Well, I didn't take lessons. I never studied conducting. Yes, it's to a large extent a hands-on experience. You have to do it. But on the other hand, I learned a tremendous amount by playing in the orchestra and looking at the conductors. And Boulez, of course, was among the more important people to me because I watched him for so much time, so many weeks every year, and I learned a lot from him, as I did from a number of conductors that conducted the Philharmonic regularly.
Give me an instrumentalist's eye view of different conductors. Does the approach vary tremendously with each conductor? It certainly seems to from sitting back and watching from the audience, but did you notice that it's said that Herbert von Karajan can say more with the twitching of an eyebrow than a lot of different conductors can with, just absolutely going rather crazy on stage?
Yes, every conductor, in fact, has his own technique. I mean, it goes that far. The way you wave your arms is what they call technique. It's like a walk. If you, Tim, would get up and walk around the room, that would be your walk, right? Mm. Your wife would probably be able to recognize your walk. When my wife walks down the hall, when I'm in a dressing room, let's say the concert hall, I hear her walk. I know that's my wife walking down the hall. That's her personality. It's the same thing when you speak. You have that kind of personality. When you wave your arms, you do. You have your own technique. It's not like an instrument, like a violin, where you can learn how to hold the bow and learn how to put the fingers down, and you learn the French school or the Russian school, or you hold it like this, or you hold it like that, or you play like that. It's all different ways of teaching. Conducting's not like that. Everyone has their own technique, and everyone has their own approach, not only to the music, but also to how to make an orchestra sound good, which is part of the job of the conductor.
But certainly there must be some universal values.
Yeah, there are patterns. There are patterns of conducting. We make a pattern like this, that's a 4 pattern, or a 3 pattern, a 2 pattern. Not even a 5 pattern isn't universal. I mean, I do a 5 pattern generally like this, which is the way Boulez did it. But before I knew Boulez, I used to do a 5 pattern like this. So I used to go 1, 2 over here, 4, 5. And Boulez's way was so effective of being 1 and then 2 to this side, and then 3, 4, 5, which is almost like a 4 pattern with a downbeat in front of it, if you put 2 off to the side, rather than the old pattern I did, like that I adopted, for the most part, using his 5 pattern, which I liked very much. But, I mean, there's so little that's universal. That's about it. Mm-hmm. The patterns, it's about it. Yes, there are other things. Soft, loud, I don't know, a few other things.
When I was speaking,
terrible, good,
When I was speaking with Lucas Foss a couple weeks ago, I asked him, because this is a question which I'm often asked, and I give my own answer from my own perspective, but I asked Mr. Foss about what exactly it is that a conductor does. What are the duties? And he gave me some marvelous answers, but they were all basically couched in metaphysical terms. Maybe that's the best way to talk about the job, but I'd like to ask you the same question. What exactly a conductor does? What are the duties? What is it that you do that makes the orchestra come alive, as it were? Because we all know of orchestras which do play by themselves, including some excellent ones. The Collegium Aureum is one. Orpheus Ensemble here in New York is another. But I'd just be very curious.
You mean not before we get to the orchestra, but when we're there conducting?
When you're there conducting, just the entire duty of a conductor. Say you are engaged by the X Symphony to come down and do 2 concerts with the orchestra. What are your duties when you go see that orchestra? We'll talk about the duties of a music director a little later, but for the moment, I'd just say you are given a ticket and sent to this town to do something with the local orchestra. What are your duties?
Well, so we're talking about you have made a program, you've prepared the program, you know the repertoire.
Yeah, that's
all
a
of that's
situation.
taken care of. So you come before an orchestra. What you do is primarily to start with. Is to set a tempo. How fast does the piece go?
So at the basic
at the
most base level, it's a time beating.
Right. The basic level is you have to set up. It's not so much time beating as setting a tempo. When I say it's not you can beat. Time beating means you have let's say a pulse that I can give and I can beat time. So if I ask all of you to clap now, you can easily clap. I'll just tell you when to clap. That's what we call time beating. If I give a sign of a tempo, we do that by giving an upbeat, right? If I take a breath, I'll say, go. So if I asked all of you now to go with me, just do it once, let's try it. go. Everyone can do it. Now, if I would continue at that same tempo, it would be go, 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 go. You know that. All I have to do is give an upbeat. If I go, then for the most part, a good orchestra could be able to go forever. If I give an upbeat that went like this, go, go, or if it went go, go, go. So you don't have to really beat so much time. You have to give a good upbeat so they know what this beat is going to be. So you set the tempo. Now, once you set the tempo, you start the piece. That's the beginning. Now, you learn something right away from an orchestra when you start the piece. If I go like that, I will almost always, what we do call bounce the beat. I would never go. It's hard. It's hard for an orchestra to play like that. It's hard for any of us to play like that. We all want to play like that. So that I wouldn't go generally, depending on the repertoire, of course, but in general, I wouldn't go. It chokes you a little bit. You want to go boom, boom, and have that bounce a little bit. Okay, now in that bounce that I give, an orchestra responds to that bounce. Now how do they respond? Do they respond boom, or do they respond boom? Where around that beat do they respond? Now you'd think that'd be universal. Well, even that's not universal. Sometimes, especially in slow tempos, I don't know if you've gone to an orchestra concert at a slow tempo, a conductor gives a beat, and you can't understand how the orchestra knows when to play. The guy gives a beat like this. They play, and you wonder how. I mean, I can tell you from playing in the New York Philharmonic how we used to do that. You used to just wait as long as you possibly could. When you couldn't wait any longer, you played. People thought that was very profound, Oh, wasn't that, the conductor gets there and makes this sound. And in fact, what it did is it made everybody in the orchestra terribly uptight because we had no idea where to play. And then you just kind of, go in when the next guy comes in, and then usually the tempo got slow because you start doing that, it's and then you talk to some conductors, they'll tell you how the orchestras slow down all the time. Well, the orchestras don't slow down all the time, but they don't read your beat. If you give a beat to start with, which has a tremendous rebound, so they play on the rebound rather than what we call the downbeat, then the next beat, is that going to be a tremendous rebound as well? And the next, and the next, and are you going to always do rebounds? So let's say we do all rebounds. Let me give you the difference. A downbeat would be boom, and a rebound would be ba. See the difference? Boom is a downbeat, ba is a rebound. Now the rebound can be late, it can be ba, So let's say I do rebounds, okay? So we'll do ba, 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 ba. It gets complicated, huh? Downbeats are much easier, ba, 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 easier, but rebounds, ba. Now let's say you're doing a slow tempo, so you do a rebound. Bom, 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 ba, da. And the conductor keeps waiting for the next note to come out, and the tempo gets slower and slower. And that's what often happens. I mean, even Karajan said orchestras slow down all the time, and there were some famous conductors. I think Beecham was one who used to rehearse everything fast so that at the concerts, when everyone slowed down, it would be the right tempo. So when you give that first sign, then they play, you know where they read the beat. So you adjust like that. Immediately adjust your technique, how they read your beat. You want them to read your beat your way, but there are 100 of them and one of you. Sometimes it's a little better if you make an adjustment towards what they're used to. It varies. After you start the piece, which is no easy task, as you can see, your whole job is to listen, that's all. You don't have to cue. You don't have to twitch your eyebrow. I'm sorry, I don't want to insult Herbert von Karajan, certainly, but your job as a conductor is to listen. You have to listen to what they're doing. How is it going? Do they have a good sense of rhythm? Do they have a good sense of pitch? How are they phrasing? Are they following your gestures? Are they used to looking at a conductor, or are they used to avoiding a conductor? Now, that's a bizarre question, but in fact, there are many orchestras that have a music director who, for example, they may not like, who they have a hard time following, so they don't look. They just play. And when you conduct an orchestra like that, they tend to not look up much. Or you can have an orchestra that tends to rehearse a lot. Let's say you have an orchestra that has a tremendous amount of rehearsals, which usually means that the first rehearsal they don't play so well, because they're used to having someone rehearse them a lot. It's a very complicated thing, but I think when you go, the first thing you have to do is evaluate all that's going on. What does the balance sound like? What is the quality of tone that the orchestra is making? And then, as you play through this movement of a symphony or whatever it is, you start to evaluate what you're going to do. You're the conductor now. You're trying to make music with this orchestra. There are going to be differences in their approach towards yours. Do they know the repertoire? Do they know how the piece goes? Have they played it before? You can tell. How much have they played it before? And what style have they played it? Then you're going to go back and say, okay, now you want to make your interpretation on this piece. The question then becomes, what do you do? Do you talk about technical things? Do you talk about musical things? Do you correct pitch? Do you correct rhythm? Do you correct balances? Do you play through some more? Do you try to get them to understand your beat better? How much adjusting do you do of your beat? I mean, that's what goes on.
What is italicized?
Yes. It's a very difficult thing. That's why many of us prefer to be music directors and guest conductors. You're a music director, you're the boss, you go in and they know how your beat goes. They know what to expect. They know what you're looking for. They'll play with the right rhythm if you've taught them how to play the right rhythm. And they'll play in tune if they know that's important to you. I mean, basic things. Mm-hmm. If they don't think you can hear the pitch, they won't spend any time tuning before the rehearsals. I'm serious. Mm-hmm. They'll tune the A and then that's it. So as everyone will say, well, one note will be in tune, maybe. You know.
How does one discipline an orchestra, which is really unruly? Because I understand that happens a fair amount. There are some orchestras where they just decide right in advance that they're going to have fun with this conductor or with this person.
The only way a conductor can deal with any orchestra, be it as a music director or a guest conductor, is if the orchestra has a musical respect for what the conductor's doing. Every orchestra wants to play well, I think. Every orchestra, professional orchestra, has the ability to play well. They want to look at a conductor and say, here is a man or a woman who I can respect, who has a point of view musically, who knows the score, knows the orchestra, and is going to conduct, and they'll play. If the conductor makes mistakes, corrects somebody who's not playing, corrects a note that's been corrected by the player already, says things that don't make any sense, stops too much, talks too much, doesn't make any sense, whatever he may do to offend a particular orchestra, they can become unruly. And the conductors, for the most part, bring it upon themselves. If an orchestra tends to talk a lot, you just ask them to be quiet. I mean, there are orchestras who tend to talk a lot. If you go into some offices, in some office, everybody's quiet and doing their work. In other offices, they talk a lot. Families are like that. You go to dinner in somebody's house, sometimes kind of quiet at dinner, sometimes very noisy at dinner. Well, orchestras are like that too. I guess those tendencies, you can't be offended by that. If an orchestra tends to like to talk, I'm not going to be offended because they're talking. I'm not going to think that they're doing it to me. Mm. I'll just ask them to be quiet.
We've touched a bit on technical requirements of a conductor, and I'd like to pin you down as to what the technical equipment a conductor needs to be a competent conductor. The reason I ask is that when we read stories of some certainly great conductors, somebody like Wilhelm Furtwängler, who was famous for his shaky downbeat, and nobody could really tell when exactly anything was going to happen, yet he is generally considered to be a great conductor, but perhaps a conductor who did not have as much technical competence as many a conductor who cannot create the same sort of luminous musical experience. So what are exactly the technical requirements, and how important, in fact, are they if you have one of these sort of mystical visionaries out there?
Well, the technical requirements really are not technical, I don't think, and using your example, they're not technical in the sense of how do you beat time. They're technical only in the sense of the conceptual and oral technique. The key for every conductor, and I said it before, is hearing. You have to hear what's going on. You have to have a concept of how you want it to go. Now that's really our technique. For us, you sit, I mean, I can tell you, I've never in my life ever practiced conducting. I've never practiced beating anything. I've never practiced in front of a mirror. I never want to see what I look like from behind. That's not an issue for me. All I ever do, I sit in a chair and I look at a score. Now, that's what I do. What I do is I look at the notes and, first of all, see what the composer wrote, understand what he wrote, analyze what he wrote, interpret what he wrote, and it's all in my mind. That's my technique. My technique is like any conductor's technique, is to have a concept of how the music has to go. Then you take that concept and you somehow have to impart that idea in your brain to the orchestra, and then you have to hear through your ears how, of course, they're responding to that concept. So the technical part then, in our thinking then, becomes how do you get them to sound that way? How do you get them to make those sounds that you're looking for, to phrase the way you phrase? And I don't think you do it by having clear beats. Mm-hmm. I think you do it by having a musical direction in what you do with your body. That's what Furtwängler had, that's what Toscanini had, that's what they all had.
Go into this a little more,
yeah.
Because I think...
If I want a phrase to go a certain way, I make movements with my body or with my hands to make that phrase go that way. If I want things to be intense, you have a pencil? You have a pencil. Yeah. If I, let's say, want to give an intense beat, so that this, let's say at a tempo like, let's say at this tempo, if I give a beat like that, you can feel the tension, you can feel the intensity. If I want it to be light, I'll give a beat like that, same tempo. If I want it to be very short and accented, I give a beat like that. Now, that's to demonstrate things in the music. For the most part, we don't have to do that, because the players do that anyway. I mean, if they don't do it, then you have to have the means to be able to make them do it, or to encourage them to do it. Whether it means through intensity, or through accents, or through gracefulness, or whatever, however you can do it, whatever you're looking for. You can, if you give a beat, and they do what you ask, then everything's fine. If you know what's going, you can relax, let the musicians play, so to speak. I try not to interfere. If I didn't have to conduct, I wouldn't conduct. My job is to try to make it easier for the musicians to play well, and to hopefully play in a way that is together with my concept musically. So I have to make it easy for them, but on the other hand, I have to make sure that we're all doing the same thing. So by making it easy for them means you don't want to push people around. As a conductor, you can push people around. You can make them do this, make them go faster, make them go slower. I was rehearsing the G minor symphony today of Mozart. And the last movement goes, it's called Allegro Assai, which is one of the fastest tempos Mozart ever wrote. In a number of pieces where he did different versions. One time he called it Allegro Assai, one time he called it Presto. I mean, in principle, it's the same tempo for Mozart. And as you probably all know, the movement goes, excuse my voice. So, there are two ways of playing, basically. Either we can hold the music tight and hold it back. We could go, I'm holding it now, right? Or we can let it go. So it has a forward movement. Now, they're both basically the same tempos. If the orchestra is playing tight and holding it and being careful and trying to make sure every note's exactly right, they'll tend to make the movement sound stodgy. That's the way the orchestra happened to play it. You know, we had talked about the length of this note, the length of that note. This note should be long, this note should be short. There should be all these little details that I like to work on, that they like to work on, which are very interesting, especially in that movement. But then, as a result of everyone thinking about it, they started to play every note they were thinking instead of letting the piece go. So I started to push them to go faster. It wasn't faster, it was a forward movement. And of course, there I was, in a sense, ruining the performance, because they had their performance, and now I was trying to change it. So I could have kept doing that for a while, and eventually they probably would have caught on. Instead, I stopped and said, I like the feeling of this movement to be going forward. What does that mean? Be going forward. And of course it's going forward. But right away they knew exactly what I meant, and I said, okay, let's do it. One, and it was perfect, like that. So on a technical level, what am I doing? Well, on the one hand, I'm listening, I'm telling them certain things about the length of the notes. For example, just to give an example. That passage, the first two notes are slurred. Da-dee. The next three notes have dots. Pop, pop, pop. the next note, dee-da, is slurred again, and then you have forte. So, my concept of this piece is that it should go so that you hear rather than the way most people do it, which is which is, to me, very asymmetrical. It doesn't make any sense. You know, here's the first bar of the phrase, second bar, and then the forte doesn't have any impact. You make crescendo, it doesn't make any sense. The long note, people go and when it's written long, no dot, with a slur. I mean, all these things. So you start to talk to an orchestra about it. It's all written in the part. I write in my parts. I write it all in. They have the concept, but then they have to get the right mood. The details aren't enough. It's the right feeling, the spirit of the music. You know, I don't want to get metaphysical now. What the spirit of the music is. But
no, I didn't want to suggest that we stay away from that. But I did want to just get some real concept about what went on. But please talk about this.
I can tell all of you that I can. You know, I can conduct something now. No music, no sounds, and you'll know not the piece, but the mood of what I'm trying to create.
Would you try that?
The obvious ones, you know, you do. Okay, yes and no. I'll do it a little bit. I don't want to embarrass myself.
Okay.
But when you do something like that, you do it with the way you begin. Let's say you're going to do if I'm going to do the G minor symphony. So if I'm doing if I do the first movement, no, it's not that. That's more complicated. That's molto allegro, and that's a whole other story about how that moves. Let's talk about the same movement we're doing. If I want it to be light and moving ahead, I'm not going to begin it like this. Right? I'll begin it like this. There's a difference between going everybody knows just by the way I stand up. I don't think about it. I don't think, oh yes, now I'm going to try to do this slide, I'll stand up straight. I don't think about it, but it's obvious to any of you. If I would ask you to do it, you would do it the same way I would. Probably. I do it more often than you do, so I probably do it a little more naturally. But so let's say you want the spirit to be light, so you lift your chest a little bit and you relax and you give easy beats. Almost in one. Almost rather than wow, we're going to play it together, watch. You know? Well, I used to play in the orchestra, and guys used to do that. You could watch them, and they'd say, oh, it's not together, I'll make it right, you know? I'll force it to be right. And then it would, oh God, to play, when you had conductors like that, who had this tremendous tension all the time in their arms and their faces, you really didn't look up. You just didn't look. You couldn't look, because it would make you play in a way you couldn't stand. And it's true. You give a beat, an orchestra sounds differently with every conductor. Just by the way you give that upbeat, the way you address the orchestra, the way your face looks, not the way what you wear. I don't believe that. I wear whatever I wear. I mean, there are those people, I know lots of them, conductors who wear only black pants, black shirt. The idea is you wear black turtlenecks, in fact, so that your face and hands stick out as being noticeable. Look, the fact is your face and hands are going to be noticeable. I mean, that's not a problem, I don't think. But you can go a little too far with all of the how you should do it.
So a conductor really must be, it sounds, an actor, a dancer, a gymnast of sorts, a psychiatrist, a musicologist. It seems to be a tremendous amount of different skills that must somehow be present in one entity.
Yes. There's the primary one, which has to be a musician of stature, an important musician. And that's without question the most important thing, who has ideas, concepts about performing music, and is willing to spend the time to study it over and over and over again, and who's willing to grow at every rehearsal, at every concert, every day of his life as an artist, who's not ever going to say, well, I know that piece, but who will always say, I was very pleased, let's say, of that performance, knowing that it'll be better or different or something next time.
I
mean, I can tell you a story about what happened today. I'll give you an example. We're doing, I'll talk about the same piece because I rehearsed it this afternoon. The minuet movement, the allegretto of that bom bim ba la pa 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 bom 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 ba la pa 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 bom. Right, everyone knows that, right? So, without going into all the details of how I do that, I think of that first theme to begin with as a kind of martial theme. Bom bim bom 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 ba la pa 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 bom, and then ba 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 bi da 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 da, very legato and beautiful and singing. Now today I was conducting it, and I said no, I want it bom bim ba la da 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 dum bom 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 bi la da 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 dum, and then bom bom ba legato on those two notes, right? Sounds reasonable. And all of a sudden I thought to myself, maybe that's wrong. Maybe it shouldn't be legato on the second beat. Maybe it should be legato on the third beat. After all, the phrase is bom bom bim ba 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 bom 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 ba. Now, I'll explain what I'm getting at. The piece begins with an upbeat. 3-1, right? Bom bom bi la da 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 dum. Okay? Now, in that third bar, is it bom bim pa la da 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 dum, bom bom bi la da 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 dum, bom bom bom, or is it bom bim pa la da 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 dum, bom 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 bi la da 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 dum, bom bom ba? In other words, does each phrase have two upbeats or one? Now the first one obviously has one. After that, it's not obvious anymore. Now, to me, it was always bom bi da la da 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 dum, bom bom ba da la da 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 dum, ba 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 da. And all of a sudden, I thought to myself today, as I was conducting this, with a piece that I've conducted for many years, and I've recorded, and I've toured with, and I've probably played 40 times. Gee, maybe it's the third beat. Maybe it's only one upbeat. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it shouldn't be two legato. Maybe the orchestra resists it naturally because it's only one. Oh, here I go again. You know, I don't know if you know what that means to me. It means that I have to now, tonight, after we finish here, go home and think about it again and again and again, and hopefully I don't change my mind. If I do, then I have to go back tomorrow and say, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but in fact, I was absolutely wrong about that, and we must do it this way now. And I have to, how could I be so stupid as to not know this after having played this piece so much? You know, how important is it? To me, it's very important. And I have to be sure at that moment. You know, if you come this weekend, you'll know what I decide. Who knows?
Let's talk a little more about interpretation, because you've touched on it a few times. There's some conductors, I think, who take a very austere, literalist view of interpretation, that somehow even channeling it through your own musical instincts is somehow wrong. Now, I'm not talking about huge recomposition here or massive changes in tempos, but I am curious as to how much interpretation you think is necessary, how much is just inherent in the score, and how much you personally add to it.
The first thing you have to say to that is, it depends upon the piece. It depends upon the era, it depends upon the music. You tamper more with certain pieces, interpret them more than others. It depends upon how much the composer himself or herself has given you in terms of directions, too. I believe very strongly in getting it right, if it's possible, to do what's on the page. I believe that. I always begin from what's on the page. So, my primary concern to start with, when I'm thinking about a piece, is doing the rhythms right, getting the tempos right, from whatever study, depending upon whether it's a metronome mark or whether it's a tempo indication, to get that right, to get balances right, to get all of that right. Okay, so that on the surface at least, I'll know how the piece goes, be it in my mind or with an orchestra. Then, first of all, you have to interpret everything. You can't not interpret a piece. You have to interpret it. If you left it like that, it would be, from my taste, impossible. That's not to say you don't leave some stuff alone, but it means that when it comes to making the essence of the music, you have to add a phrase, a crescendo, a diminuendo, a little color change, a little nuance, regardless of the period of the music. It varies from piece to piece. For example, we're doing a piece this week by David Diamond called Romeo and Juliet. I change tempo in that all the time. That are not changes that aren't marked. I first did the piece a few years ago, and I did it, in my mind. I figured it out. I love the colors. I love the American sounds. I love the orchestration. I love the tunes. I did the first rehearsal. I didn't love the piece. I thought it was a good piece. Didn't love it. I thought, I'm doing something wrong. Why haven't I reached the essence of this piece? What's wrong with this piece? I thought about it, and I realized that it needed a freedom. It needed to be more than just the contour of the phrase. This is an 8-bar phrase, and put the high point on the 5th bar, or the 6-bar phrase, or a 4-bar phrase, or an explosion, or a little energy here, a little this or that. It needed more than that. It needed major tempo fluctuations. It just felt right to do that. And I did it the next rehearsal. It's like another piece, a completely different piece to me. And it all of a sudden came to life. Now, it reminds me of a great story. It hit me just at that moment of a performance I did of the Roy Harris Third Symphony, a piece I've conducted a number of times, but this is going back yet further when I was playing the trumpet. And Bernstein did this piece with the New York Philharmonic. It was stunning, fabulous performance, every performance. Then we did it on tour about 6 months later with another conductor. I won't mention his name because it wasn't so wonderful. And he did it the way it was on the page. And all of a sudden, I realized what Bernstein had done to make that piece so wonderful. He had tampered with it. He had tampered with every bar in terms of the tempo fluctuation, in terms of making the music come alive. And that's then what I was doing with David's piece. And it worked. And the piece was now, so then, the best part of the story was, David came to a rehearsal. And he sat next to my wife, Jody, and started hearing all of this. And he said, oh, that's fabulous. Oh, wonderful. Oh, look what he's, oh, more. He should do that more. Oh, that's great. And not only was I doing it, but it's what he wanted. Of course, then you can say, how come he didn't write it? Maybe that will be our performance practice. How come he didn't write it? I don't know why he didn't write it. But it was right. And today when I did this piece, the whole orchestra said, what a passionate piece, what a gorgeous piece, how extraordinary this piece is. When I did it the first time, a few years ago, they didn't feel that way until the performances, because then by the time the performance came about, we had done it, and we had really made it work. Now, Mozart needs a tremendous amount of that too. In Mozart, I do a tremendous amount of slight tempo fluctuations. Tremendous. No, you would not, it's natural, you'll never hear it. But if you had a metronome clicking to my performance of the first one of the G minor symphony, you'd be shocked at how many changes there are. And the changes, to a certain extent, are rehearsed. Some of them aren't. And I try to save things for the concerts, too, which I'll talk about a little later. But a lot of them are rehearsed. It's very tricky to get these things, to get these little nuances, but they're very small, but they make for a performance. Dealing with the phrasing, dealing with the length of the notes. For example, the opening theme of the G minor symphony. I can't tell you how many hours I agonized over not only how it should be phrased, but how it should be bowed in terms of the string technique. But as you know, it goes di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dee, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dee-da, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, da-da-da-da. As you know, it's written, if I would just sing it straight, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dee, di-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da. So at a minimal, you have to have a contour to that phrase, the way any sentence is. So I make a crescendo, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dee, and then diminuendo, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-da, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da-da. Then what? So I go, di-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da, di-da-da-dee-da-da-da. Now all of a sudden I've lost it, right, for me. Because you do this first phrase, and you make some kind of music out of it, then you do the second time, it's still wonderful, and then the third time you do it again, and you do it. So what I do is, la-da-da-dee-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dee-da-da-da-dee, la-da-da-da-dee. So what it amounts to is, di-da-dum, di-da-da-dee, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da. 4-bar phrase, da-da-dum, di-da-dum, da-da-da-dee, da-da-dum, di-da-dum, da-da-da. Then, la-da-da-dee-da-da-da-dum, a 2. And then a 4 again. La-da-da-dee, da-da-da-dee, la-da-da-da-dee, really a 5. So that's just the basic contours. Then you say, well, is that right? What else do you need? Well, if you notice, the first time I sang it, when you didn't know the things I was doing, I sang the first bar 2 bars long and the next 2 bars short. I sang Di-da-da, this note, di-da-da, 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 dee, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da. So it was da-da long, da-da dee, da-da lift, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da. You don't notice it when you sing it. Di-da-dum, di-da-dum, di-da-da, dee, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da. But I do that. That's part of the interpretation. And then when it comes ba-ba-bam, ba-ba-bam, it's a more deliberate sound, a little more deliberate beat, and slightly slower tempo. I mean, all of these things, how do you interpret what does molto allegro mean? Molto allegro is very fast. I mean, I remember as a kid hearing bi-da-dum, bi-da-dum, bi-da-da, dee, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, dee-da-dum, da-da. Does that sound molto allegro to you? It's a very tricky question. And then, of course, most people assume that profound music has to be slow. I don't know if you know that. Whenever I do the B minor Mass, everyone thinks that it's very profound because I do 3 movements quite slowly. When I do the Beethoven First Symphony, they don't think it's so profound because there's no slow movement. You know, the slow movement is marked 1/22 and 1/8 note, which is the allegretto. I mean, there is no slow movement. We have this bizarre equal sign between being profound and slow.
That's like minor and sad.
Well, I can tell you, I was talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, and he said, if you want to be profound, this is what you do. I won't tell you what he said, I'll just do it. Okay, you're the audience, I'm the conductor, right? So I'm going to come out, and I'm beginning the concert. I'm ready to go. Okay, that's one. Now here's the second conductor. Right? That's what profound is these days. So a friend of mine said, if you want to be profound, walk slowly and be very serious, and dye your hair gray. So it's very funny. But anyway, and every period of music demands a different kind of interpretation, a different kind of. The Beethoven First Symphony, for example, needs less interpretation than the Mozart G minor does. A Mahler symphony, if you follow what he wrote, needs less interpretation in many ways. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm wrong about that. If you follow what he wrote, you can pretty much do what he wrote on the page. I never do, but totally. I mean, I do a lot to it myself. But in fact, if you just follow the markings, which very few guys do, I'll tell you a story. To me, a fascinating story. Do I have time for another story?
Sure.
Yeah,
we got time.
I was conducting the Mahler Third Symphony. And a friend of mine, I was conducting in Seattle, a friend of mine from Los Angeles flew up to hear the performance. And if you know, it has that beautiful chorale in the last movement. Oh, it's such gorgeous music. And I played the piece a number of times. And when I started studying it, first time I did it, a long time ago, about 6-8 years ago, I noticed that every time the chorale comes in towards the end, it gets slower and slower and slower. And he writes langsam and etwas langsamer and etwas slower and slower until the last time when the brass come in with that, it's really slow. And I remembered as a kid, having played it and listened to a lot of recordings of it, of course, because I was a trumpet player, that everybody used to go very fast at that spot. I could never understand why. So I followed what Mahler wrote, and I got slower and slower, and it was to hold that thread of tension at that slow, soft level. I mean, you can have tension being soft. Was such a moving experience for me as a conductor. I was really quite. I enjoyed it. I was excited. All the wrong words. I was moved by it personally, just hearing the music around me. So this friend of mine from Los Angeles, who's not a musician, a lawyer, doesn't really read music that I know. Maybe reads music. I don't know. He came to me and he said, "Boy, you're the first conductor I ever heard do the end right." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you did it slower. And everyone does it faster, but you did it slower." And then he listed all the conductors he heard do it, go faster and double time it and do it twice as fast. And he said, he never, and I said, "You study the score?" He said, "Of course not." I thought to myself, how does this guy, who's a lawyer, who doesn't read, I mean, he may read music, I don't know if he does, who certainly didn't study the score, know that it should be slower? Well, all I did, and I told him, was I did what the composer said. The composer said, yet slower, yet slower. And I went yet slower. and it was gorgeous. I guess you have to have some courage sometimes to go yet slower, or to go yet faster, or to phrase in this way, or to do it in this way. Whenever you do anything that's a little unusual, people will criticize you. If you do it mediocre and right in the middle, everyone will love you, guaranteed. So he came to me and said this, and I was quite astounded that he, without knowing it, knew that it was right. So to a point, it's following what the composers wrote. Now, I'm going to go against what I said. I'm doing Judas Maccabeus here in December, a piece I've been studying for months now. It's a very difficult piece. I do a tremendous amount of editing in Baroque music, naturally, because there's no dynamics, no ornaments. Tempo indications are not complete. I mark dots and dashes and trills and phrasings and tempos, and I give a copy of the score to the soloist, a copy of the score to the chorus. Everybody has to mark their parts according to what I wrote in my score. Then I come back, a couple months later and do the piece. Well, I had a terrible time with this piece because the whole first act is slow, but so slow that it just didn't work. I just couldn't make it work. Now, in this particular piece, I played it at the piano, even though I don't usually do that. I played it at the piano because I kept looking at it and saying, no, this isn't going to work for me. It's just too slow. And the next chorus is too slow. And the next aria, and they're marked largo, and they're marked andante and larghetto, and they're marked slow tempo marks. And I had to try to figure out a way to justify doing faster tempos when it says largo, which is, I'm going to do the faster tempos, but I'm not exactly sure how to justify it yet. I keep looking at, I look at all my books. I've read about 4 different definitions of largo to see if I could find one that said something that would give me a justification for doing it faster, because I'm curious, I guess. But it's hard. It's hard then to say, the composer wrote largo, and you're going to really do it at a tempo that would not be considered to be largo, and yet you have to do it because personally, for your performance, the music will die if you do it that fast or that slow. I mean, many people feel that way about Beethoven metronome marks. If you do it as fast as he wrote, you'll ruin the music. If you feel that way, you have to go slower. You have to.
Let's move on to the duties of a music director, which are very different than those of a conductor, although they do include them. You are a music director here at the 92nd Street Y. You're the music director of Music Today with the Seattle Symphony and mostly Mozart. I'm sure I'm leaving something else.
That's all I can remember now. No, I think that's about it.
What are the duties? And I guess while we're on the duties, I'd be curious as to how you manage to balance so many disparate duties.
Well, the duties really, there are many areas. In terms of the orchestra, you hire and fire. If you feel someone can't play anymore, it's your job to fire. I don't believe in that for the most part. I've never fired anyone. I never will, not for their playing. Then you hire people. Someone leaves, goes to another orchestra, whatever, retires, whatever, and you hire. That means you have auditions, you hire. So that's what you make programs for yourself and for everyone else. You are actively involved in all the programs that go on with the orchestra. I'm talking about a music director now in the way I see it. Other people do it differently, but this is what I believe in. You balance those programs so that over a course of a year, if somebody comes to all the concerts, they're going to get a balanced diet of music making, of some new, some old, something unusual, standards, whatever it may be. You, for the most part, in consultation with the manager of the orchestra, pick soloists, guest conductors. All of this is done in consultation with other people that are involved in it. You philosophically oversee the direction of the orchestra. Where is it going? What should it be doing? What are the priorities? How much work should it be doing in education? Should it be on tour? Should we be making records? What kind of records should we be making? What kind of series should we be doing? What's good for the orchestra? Should we do chamber music? What is for the best health of the orchestra, whether you're there or not? Is it good to do pop concerts? Is it bad? Is it good to play in an outdoor summer pavilion? Is it good to play without enough rehearsal time? Is it good to travel for 3 hours on a bus before you do a run-out concert? I mean, all these little questions that you look over. You look over also how the orchestra is represented. How are they represented to the press? How are they represented to the public? What kind of materials are going out about it? Doesn't mean you're a dictator about it, because you're working with every different department. If you're dealing with the press, you're dealing with the press department. If you're dealing with how the brochure is, you're dealing with the marketing department. If you're dealing with if the musicians are happy or not. You're dealing with the orchestra manager. It just varies a lot. The orchestra is your responsibility. If it doesn't go well, it's your responsibility. If it goes well, it's your responsibility. And that doesn't only mean when you're there. When you're not there, it's also your responsibility. That's the job. The job is to know music, know a tremendous amount of it, because you're programming a lot of it. You have to have a tremendous knowledge of repertoire to be a good music director, because you have to have not only ideas for yourself, but ideas for everybody else. And you note, when I engage guest conductors, I have to give many of them many ideas, because very few of them want to do anything but the same 10 pieces. And so you have to come back at them, and someone says, what do you want to do? And they all say they want to do pictures in an exhibition, or Scheherazade, or the Sibelius II, or the Tchaikovsky Fourth, or Fifth. I mean, I can name, or the Brahms Second. I can name all the pieces that everybody wants to do. And then you have to say, well, instead of doing the Dvorak Ninth, what about the Dvorak Sixth? That's, it's a wonderful piece. You must know it, of course. Or can't you do some piece of American music? Well, I don't know any American music. Well, you must know the unanswered question of Charles Ives. Oh, yes, I know that. Oh, good. Why don't you do that? Or whatever it may be. You have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge about repertoire. Then I think you have a certain responsibility to deal with the boards of directors of the orchestra, to deal with the community. New York is a little different than most, but in a city like Seattle, you're actively involved with the community. You know the congressman, you know the mayor, you know the senators, you know the governor. You're a lobbyist in a subtle way for the orchestra. You are actively involved in the parts that are used, through the librarians, the bowings that are used. Today I was working on Maxim Shostakovich's bowings, because he doesn't do his own, and I was afraid that if they're not done properly, he'll come and they'll spend all their time rehearsing, marking bowings in the parts, and I won't have that. You look out for the orchestra, make sure that they're being treated properly. I don't know, what did I leave out? Did I forget something?
I think that pretty well covers it.
That's what the music director does. Then the second part of your question, if that's true, how do I do it in so many places? I guess until recently I've had 2 winter places and 2 summer places. I've had 2 winter places, it means Los Angeles and the Y, both chamber orchestras, doing similar repertoire, having similar problems, both being part-time orchestras. We do 15 weeks, whatever, and between the 2 orchestras it's 30 weeks. Oh, I forgot to say one thing. I believe very strongly that the music director has to conduct a majority of the concerts. That's very important, I believe. So if I say a majority of the concerts and we have 30 weeks between the 2 orchestras, well, I probably, in those years when I was doing both, which has been for the last 7, I probably conducted, of the 30 weeks, I probably conducted 24, which is a majority, almost all the concerts. You have to give, you have a responsibility to make the orchestra have a personality of its own that comes from you. You can only have that if you're there conducting them. You can't have it if they're only guest conductors. It's almost impossible, unless you've been there for 12 years or 15 years, all the time, insisting on a certain way of playing, then the orchestra will do it by themselves, even if you're not there. I mean, it can be done in a shorter period of time, but I mean, when I say you're not there, I mean, the perfect example is the George Zell Cleveland example. He was there for many years, for many weeks. When he died, they still sounded like the orchestra that he trained. New people would come in and they'd learn Zell's way, even though Zell was no longer alive. Really true story. People who were in the orchestra would talk about Zell as if they knew him, and they never even saw him conduct, because it was such an important tradition to this orchestra. So for my 2 winter orchestras, it wasn't a problem. They were part-time. And the 2 summer festivals, again, it wasn't a problem. That's only been in the last few years that I've had those 2 to deal with. And then, when I took Seattle on, I let go of Los Angeles. Seattle's a much larger commitment because it's an orchestra that has a 45-week season, and there's a lot of responsibilities there, and I spend 22 weeks a year there. It's a lot of weeks when you consider that they also play for the opera, which means they spend 10 weeks alone just doing opera. So, because of that, I had to relinquish my responsibilities in Los Angeles, and this is my last year there. So because I couldn't deal with all the administrative questions. Here at the Y, I have quite a wonderful situation where a lot of the responsibilities that a music director would normally have, we just aren't as demanding as they would be in other places because the places run so well. The better a place is run, the less I have to worry. If fundraising goes well, then I don't have to spend all my time worrying about whether we have enough money. I'm not saying the fundraising always goes well, but I'm just saying if. If the marketing is wonderful, then I don't have to bother with it. If the publicity is handled well, I can leave it alone. So here, I must say, Omis, who you met a minute ago, overlooks a lot of those things that a music director often would have to do, and thank goodness he does, because it relieves a lot of the responsibilities from me here. And the other thing is that I don't guest conduct much. Now that may sound a little funny, but most conductors spend a few weeks with their orchestras as music directors and spend the whole rest of the time running around the world guest conducting. I don't like it especially. I like conducting orchestras that know me, that I know, that I've worked with, that I can really make music on a very high level with, and you get most of that from orchestras that you're a music director of. So this year, for example, I'm guest conducting for a total of, I think, 6 weeks of the whole year. Next year, I think I'm guest conducting 6 weeks the whole year, which is very little. Mm-hmm. Most conductors guest conduct 30 weeks, 25 weeks. I prefer to spend time with the orchestras that I care about, where I can find a continuous artistic growth.
And how do you you've always been a committed advocate of new music. How do you manage to work it into the program so that the audience doesn't rebel against it? You actually were telling me earlier that you find that if it's presented correctly, that audiences are really actively interested in new music. And I've always suspected that that's true too, but this is something which concerns me quite a bit. And I'd be curious, what is your policy on new music?
Well, I've been criticized for the next statement I'm going to make, but I'm going to make it anyway because it's what I believe. I don't program music I don't like. If I don't like it, I'm not going to force it upon the audience. Now, I remember I said that once to Alan Rich, and maybe a quote in New York Magazine those days said, "Schwartz, he won't play music he doesn't like." I don't think that's so bad. I think it's kind of reasonable. I don't feel like I have a duty to expose an audience to music that I can't come to grips with.
Aren't there any of the standard repertory symphonies that you're just sick to death of and you don't want to play anymore, but you have to keep a board of directors happy?
No, not me. There's so many, you know. I mean, so you say you do Tchaikovsky Fifth one year, you do it 10 times. Well, the next year you do the Fourth. Then the next year you do the Sixth. Then you do the Little Russian, you know, if you want to do Tchaikovsky. And then you do some excerpts from Swan Lake or from Sleeping Beauty, and then you say, God, I haven't done the Fifth in 5 years. God, I miss it terribly, you know. The only time that ever happens is when you have a limited repertoire. If you can't conduct 5 of the 6 of the Tchaikovsky Symphony, you can only do 1, and the boards of directors wants the Tchaikovsky Symphony every couple of years. Boy, then you can get in trouble, I guess. But I find it to be wonderful music.
How did you build up a repertoire so suddenly? I mean, you began conducting, and then suddenly, bang, you're conducting all over the country, all over the world. And
no, I built up the repertoire by never repeating a piece for the first 5 or 6 years of my conducting. When I say that, I mean every week, every piece I did was new. Boy, that was rough. I never studied so much in my life as in those days. First of all, I studied all the pieces when I was in the orchestra, right? I studied them with whoever was conducting. I studied in the back, in the trumpet section. I always did that. From the time I was a little kid, I always studied that way. Because I was interested in the music. I wasn't thinking about conducting the pieces. I was just interested in the music, so I always had scores, always studied them. But the first years, in Waterloo, for example, every year we did a Mahler symphony. Every year we did a Brahms symphony. Every year that's 10 years gone by. It's a lot of Mahler and Brahms and Strauss and Wagner. And then in the chamber orchestras, even though I had 2 chamber orchestras, they didn't repeat repertoire either. I did completely different programs in both orchestras for I think 4 years. Of 1 week in Los Angeles, 1 week in New York, 1 week in Los Angeles, but always new repertoire. Now it's different. Now I repeat pieces all the time. I do them a lot. I repeat them a lot. And there's rarely that I'll do a program where there'll be more than 1 or 2 pieces new. Usually there's 1 piece new for me because I like that. I mean, this week I'm doing the Malediction of Liszt and the Schubert Webern waltzes. German dances, you're right, which is marvelous. Neither one of them is a terribly difficult piece, even though the Schubert Webern has been something I've been dying to do for a long time, and I'm having a terrific time with
wonderful.
it. Boy, it is.
Wonderful.
And what we're doing to that piece is unbelievable, I must say. I'm not saying that's good, but it's certainly unbelievable. I love it. But so I built up a repertoire, and I have a very good memory, so I remembered everything that I did. So if I did a piece 5 years ago, I remembered how I did it then, and then I was able to build on that experience. And so I'm very lucky, and that I've already done the Beethoven Ninth a half dozen times. I've done all the repertoire. I've done 5 Mahler, 6 Mahler symphonies. It's important so that I'm not afraid of it. There's nothing I'm afraid of in that sense. Some conductors, they say, well, I can't conduct the Mozart, it's Jupiter in G minor until I'm old. And all I could think of is, well, Mozart died when he was 35. He certainly wasn't old when he wrote it. Why do you have to be old to conduct it? I don't quite understand all of this. Of course, when I'm old, I'll say the same thing. It's only now that I'm 80 that I can really conduct Beethoven properly.
Well, I think this may be the time to throw open the floor to questions. We will take questions one at a time. I would ask that once you're recognized that you stand up and speak the question as loudly as you feel comfortable. If I can't hear it, I'll ask you to repeat it. I'm a little stuffed up, so that may happen. And if everybody in the room can't hear it, make some signal and I will repeat the question over microphone. Yes, please.
Do you mentioned that you conducted opera in Seattle. Do you enjoy conducting opera, and how different do you find conducting opera, aside from bringing in singers, from conducting symphony?
Yes, I love conducting opera, and it's very different because it's a much larger production to get on, much more responsibilities. A lot more can go wrong. You have to be a lot more aware of everything. The one bad part of it is that at times the primary function can be just getting it on. Getting it on very often is enough. I don't do as much opera as I could, as I'm invited to, because I won't do performances just to get it on. If someone says, we'd like you to do this opera, you have 2 rehearsals and that's it, I won't do it. I just have no interest. If it's a bad production, I don't want to have to deal with it. If there's not enough rehearsal time, because getting it on is not the most important thing to me. That's not as much fun. What's fun is making something special out of it, and it's really exciting. I don't do a lot of opera. I do usually one or two concert operas a year and 1 staged opera a year.
Next question. Yes, please.
When you're in rehearsal shaping a piece to your conception of the piece, are you more likely to use metaphors to describe it to the instrumentalists, or do you give technical directions about how to go or how to play?
I would say the question is, do I give more, do you want to repeat it?
The question was, when he's preparing a piece, does he give technical information or metaphors, or which is he more likely to use?
I try to use technical information. I try to say it technically. If it doesn't work, then I'll use metaphor. Musicians tend to prefer for me to say, would you please play it more staccato, rather than say, would you please play it like a bouncing ball going down the stairs. If they don't play it with the right bounce, maybe I'll say, couldn't you play it like a bouncing ball? But the metaphor I try not to use, except if there's no technical way I can say it, or if they're not getting what I'm getting at by using the technical, I may combine it, because I try not to do things in a technical way that without having everyone understand why. You don't want to be a teacher. You don't want to say to an orchestra, I want you to do this and this and this. Now, here's my reason why. You see, this is this marking, and this is this marking, and in 1840, this was the way the metronome worked, and this is what Czerny said about this, and you don't want to get into all of that. On the other hand, you don't want to leave the musicians out in the cold either. You don't want to not let them know why you're doing what you do. It's important for them to know it so that they can be a part of that performance. That's why it's important to go through pieces a lot. When I conduct, I go through a lot so that they get used to how it goes. If it's a new piece, I go through it more, not less, because they have to become familiar with it. I remember as a performer, as a trumpet player, playing with new music groups where everybody would rehearse every bar, and you stop and rehearse this bar and stop and rehearse that bar. Now, I don't mind any of that. I do that myself. But I don't do it until I know how the piece goes. when I conduct an ensemble, let's say my Music Today series, and I want them to know how the piece goes first, then I'll start working on all the details. The details are less important than having the musicians themselves have a concept.
Do you find that a metaphor can be a great time saver sometimes?
Yes, very often it is, because sometimes you can say something metaphorically that would be too involved to say technically.
Next. Yes, sir. Would you like that repeated? Did everyone hear that?
No, they didn't.
When he's conducting a piece where there exists a recording of the composer conducting, does he feel it incumbent upon himself to behave, I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but to adhere fairly close to the recording? Is that a fair paraphrase?
No, not at all. In fact, I don't even listen to them, I must say. I don't listen to many recordings anyway, and I never listen to Copland playing Copland or Stravinsky conducting Stravinsky. I've played with enough composers to know that they don't often know how to get the best results. They don't often conduct their pieces as well as someone else, and sometimes they are not such good conductors anyway. And when I say that, I don't mean, so I said before that you don't have to be a good technical conductor, but I mean they don't lead, they follow. However the guy does it, many of those guys, they just, get up there and then they make the records and they put their names on it, but they're really not making and shaping that performance. There are exceptions, of course. Boulez is a great exception. I would certainly listen to a recording that he made of his own music before playing it. I wouldn't feel the need to do it with others. I remember very clearly hearing Webern's recording of these Schubert dances, and that certainly has influenced my interpretation of it a great deal.
I'd like to go into that just a moment longer, if that's all right. You're free to accept or reject what the composer did in his or her recording. Don't you think that in some way it would act as a concordance of sorts? It would give you at least some other idea? I would think that recordings would be a very valuable, I don't know, think of it as musical footnote to the score.
I don't know, maybe. I've played with enough composers. I'm not going to say who they are, but I played with the most famous composers that really couldn't conduct. They really couldn't conduct. And I remember just playing through the pieces, and we all just put our heads down and not look up, especially when the changing meters came, because they couldn't do the changing meters. They were trying to be performers. They weren't being creative artists at that time. I don't think as performers some of them are good enough to be even adhered to as a footnote. And I guess the time when I'd be interested in it, for example, I decided this summer, before doing Heldenleben, I would listen to Strauss's recording of Heldenleben. Strauss, great conductor.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to hear about some wrong notes that I thought were in the parts, to see if they were right or wrong. I listened to his record. It didn't help me much, I'm sorry to say. Some of the inconsistencies in the score were inconsistent in the performance as well. Wrong notes were sometimes, the obvious ones weren't corrected, some others were. It didn't help me a lot, and I didn't feel that he did it very, very fast. God, was it fast. I didn't feel that I could ever do that. I just couldn't do that performance. It didn't help me any. All I did is hear a very fast performance, and I did the piece, and I thought to myself, God, I'm doing it too slowly, but I just can't do it any other way. I don't know the answer then.
The gentleman here looks like he's got something to say. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do you anticipate doing any opera conducting in New York soon?
No, except at mostly Mozart, where we do a concert opera in the summer. I can tell you exactly why. I'm not invited to the Met, and when I get invited to the City Opera, which is often, it's never the right circumstances. Not that it's bad. I'd go there under the right circumstances. In fact, I had a contract to go there and do Magic Flute that would have happened about a year ago, but in the end the director didn't work out, and the cast wasn't exactly right, and I thought it was just better not to do it.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
If you were to conduct at the Met, what opera would you like to conduct?
Oh, well, I have my list, which you... I really couldn't even say. Someone said to me the other day, what's your dream piece? The one piece you'd like to do that you haven't been able to do, and I can't even think of one. I mean, I just love them all. I mean, I have a great love, especially for Strauss and Mozart operas in particular. So it would be in that direction, and Wagner, be in that direction.
Yes, sir.
As a follow-up to the gentleman's comment about learning music by listening to the composer conduct, one might say that the best way to learn how to play Willy Loman would not be to watch Arthur Miller playing it.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
Can I ask one more question? I noticed looking around the room, there's a fairly high percentage of women here, and yet in seeing major orchestras of the world, one does not see a high percentage of female players and a minuscule percentage of female conductors. Could you comment on that, and what might be the opportunity for change in that? And incidentally, I do not have a brother.
Did everyone, I think, heard that?
I think everyone hear that?
I think it's a very simple situation. This was, the field of classical music was a closed field to women. Women were not allowed in major symphony orchestras around the world. In the New York Philharmonic, I think the first woman was Orrin O'Brien, and that would have been around 1960, 58, something like that.
There were some weird exceptions. The harp and the flute,
harp.
yeah.
But in New York, they didn't have a flutist. The Dory O'Dwyer got in Boston early on, but in the Berlin Philharmonic, they still don't have a woman. You know the scandal that happened when Karajan tried to hire a woman clarinetist. So I think that now, of course, that's changed. When I was leaving the Philharmonic, I think the last 4 openings that were in the orchestra were all filled by women. I would say 30% of the orchestra in Seattle made up of women. The bigger orchestras are slower to go by, but I'm convinced without any question in this country that people are hired in the orchestras according to merit, and it has nothing to do with whether they're men or women. Now that the field is open to women, the women are getting an equal, if not a larger percentage of the jobs available than men, no question. The same about conductors. The problem, of course, with conductors is there just aren't very many conductors that are successful, period. There are a number of women conductors now who are getting some important success, I think. And as there are role models, there'll be more going into it. People tend to someone has to really break the ice. I mean, we have, besides Sarah Caldwell and Catherine Comey and a number of terrific female conductors, but we haven't had one yet that has been, an international star. Or once that happens, of course, then it'll be, I think it won't even be an issue. I think there are probably some women who just don't go into it because they don't see anyone else doing it. I think that will change.
I should add that until about 40-odd years ago, Americans weren't supposed to be conductors. And before the era of Leonard Bernstein, there were a few American conductors, but Americans always looked to Europe for guidance. And I think that's still, despite all the wonderful American conductors around now, you still look at the leadership of the so-called Big Five, and you notice that it's certainly not all Americans, not even remotely.
Well, if you look at every major post in the last few years, with the exception of 2, have been, and I mean lots of posts that have been open, have all been taken by Europeans. The 2 exceptions with me in Seattle and Andre Previn in Los Angeles. But every other opening that's occurred has been taken by...
Leonard Slatkin, perhaps.
In recent years.
Oh.
I mean, Lenny's been there for 7 or 8 years now already. I mean, in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes, sir.
No, I don't memorize. I use score all the time. I'm not a conductor who memorizes scores. I know every note on the page, yes, but I do refer to it on occasion. Could I write every note down on the score? I don't know. I probably could write, in the Beethoven Symphony I certainly could. In a complicated Strauss piece, I don't think I could. Knowing it all and being able to refer to it and being able to write it down, I think they're different kind of talents. When you listen to music, whether the conductor has a score or not, it doesn't matter to the audience. They hear the performance. They don't notice whether the score is there. So Since I'm not one that memorizes, you'll have to ask that of one of the other conductors that memorizes all the time.
Yes, sir. How does somebody who's not primarily a string player go about arranging bowing technique, did you ask? I would like to add to that question, if that's all right. Leopold Stokowski was also famous for saying that he wasn't going to have a bowing, that everybody should bow just as they wanted to bow.
Right.
So if you don't mind, I'll add that on, if you would talk a little bit about bowing technique.
Well, Stokowski's way of bowing was called free bowing, which meant that you played any way you wanted. Down is this way, up is that way. Those are the two basic choices you have. And, you know, one guy would be going up, one guy would be going down. You go to a concert now, all the strings usually bow in unison. They bow together. What Stokowski cared about was the part of the bow you played on. The heavy part, right here, or the lighter part, here. Or whether it was off the string, which means the string, the hair bounces off the string, or on the string, where the hair stays on the string. In principle, that's all that matters. It matters, is the bow going to bounce? Is the bow going to be brushed? Is the bow going to be on the string? Is it going to be on the string with accent? Is it going, you know, those are all the different techniques. Whether it's down or up is not as important as one may think. The part of the bow is important. Do you play in the middle? Do you play at the frog? Do you play at the tip? It affects the sound that you make. We can mask a lot of that. I mean, we can make it sound at the point like you're at the frog sometimes. I mean, you can do that. Stokowski's way was good, but he used to always say in the rehearsals, you must understand your bow. He didn't care what direction they went in, but if he was having a rum bum 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 kind of passage, he wanted everybody playing at the frog. He didn't care if they were going like this or like this. It didn't matter to him, but he wanted that sound. You have to understand the bow, is what he always said. He'd look at somebody playing the wrong part of the bow. You, sir, understand the bow, you know.
I can hear him.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's what he used to do. You, sir. And as far as learning about bowing techniques, if you're a conductor, you just got to know. You got to study. I studied bowing. I love bowings. I'm obsessed by it. I love the way you can vary color and change sounds by different fingerings on the violin, by different positions, playing on different strings, different ways of bowing. I know more about bowing than most string players do, and I learned it from string players. And I learned it from sitting in the orchestra watching what they did and what worked and what didn't work. Bow distribution, bow speed. I talk about it all the time, and I love it. It's fun. It's the fun for me. The fun for me is dealing with those things. And you ask the string players in the orchestra, they have fun with it too, because we do so many fascinating things. You learn it like you learn anything else. How you learn to play the piano. You know, you study, and you study, and you study. And like playing an instrument, you get better at it all the time. It's really fascinating. I love it, I must say. I do all my own bowings, as you probably know. I use my own parts. I mean, not all, 90% of the time. I use all my own parts. We have a whole huge room here at the Y, which just houses my library, and I do all the bowings myself. I have a number of people who I can rely on when I'm in a crunch in terms of time, or I can't get something done. My Cozy, for example, I'm doing in Seattle in January. I don't have time to bow the whole Cozy, so my concertmaster there, who I've worked with for 7 years now, 8 years, knows what I like. And I went over a few things with him, and I said, you know what I like, finish it for me. I can trust him. I may have to make a few changes, but in principle, that is a responsibility given to him.
Let's take one or two more questions, and I think we're going to call it an evening. Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you would comment on music education.
Oh.
What would you recommend for the average child? What instrument should that child start?
Did everyone hear that? What would Mr. Schwartz recommend for music education, and what instrument should a child begin with?
So we're talking about just a specific child rather than music education in terms of orchestras, which is a whole topic that I'm a believer in everyone playing. I really believe that everybody plays. When my friends in orchestras have children, they said, well, I gave him or her the piano and when they were 5 and they didn't like it, so I let them stop. I don't believe in that. I believe that everybody should play. I played. My mother said, 5 years old, time to go take piano lessons. That was it. I mean, if I didn't like it, it was too bad. I didn't like learning how to spell either. You know, I didn't like a lot of that stuff. I'd rather play stickball. But I did, because that's what you do when you grow up. You're educated. You learn to read. You learn to write. You learn to spell. You learn to play an instrument. That's what I believe in, but that's what I care about. That's the most important thing to me. I think everybody should play the piano. You know, I really do. I believe you should study the piano. By the time you're 5, 6 years old, study the piano. And study for 10 years. It's not a tremendous sacrifice, and you learn a tremendous amount. You'll have an appreciation for music for the rest of your life. Now, that's not practical for everyone, and it may be a terrible, snobbish thing to say, but it's what I believe. I do it with my kids. I did it with them. They play. They all play. When my daughter decided she didn't want to play the piano anymore, and she was 10, she really didn't want to do it, but she really wanted to play, or 8, 9, 8, wanted to play the flute. Okay, play the flute. So she stopped playing the piano. She still plays, but she has to play. And I'm a believer in it. I believe you should read and you should play music. You know, maybe it's old-fashioned, and I'm very grateful that my mother made me play the piano every day and practiced with me. I mean, I'll never, even though I said a couple nasty things at the beginning, I'm very grateful.
Yes, sir.
You put in a lot of effort to get a rapport with the orchestra, or to produce the kind of concept that you wanted to produce.
Did everyone hear that? I'm sorry.
Do you think that the audience is getting the resultant of all your work? And do you care? And how can the audience get all this effort that you put in?
Do I strive to have a rapport with the orchestra? Yes, I strive to have a musical rapport with the orchestra. I don't strive to be friends, necessarily. I'm not against being friends. I try to always behave like a gentleman with an orchestra. But what I care about isn't being their buddies, but is to make music. And yes, I try, if possible, to be sympathetic to who they are, what they are, and what they're up against. Do I feel the audience gets it? Is that basically?
Is the audience getting the concept that you have worked so hard to produce?
I would say, yeah. I care very deeply about whether the audience gets it. Yes. Can they get it? Yes. How can they get it? Because music is something that is so much a part of all of us, we don't even know it. People come to me and they say, I don't know anything about music, but I thought that was great. Well, the fact is they know more than they think they know. They hear more than they think they know. And the audience usually responds to it. You can feel it. Sometimes in the applause, and sometimes just in other ways. It's not always from the applause. But you can feel it when it's not successful as well. All the details, no. The overall concepts, yes. All the details are for us, helps the overall concept, and for those people that are really that much tuned into it. The overall concepts can't exist without all the details that go into it. I mean, a blanket may keep you warm, or a quilt, but you have to put all those stitches in first. But the warmth is there. You know.
The more knowledgeable the audience is,
The better. The more knowledgeable the audience is, the better for all of us. That's why I do, this week, tomorrow, I spend all morning doing education concerts with kids from public schools in the area. We start a whole new series here called Musically Speaking, which is basically dealing with, talking to adults about musical questions and playing pieces through with musical examples. It's like an adult version of the young people's concerts that Bernstein used to do. And we do a similar thing called family concerts on Sunday afternoons for kids with their parents for the same purpose, because I want the person that comes back and says, I thought it was great, but I don't know anything, to come back and say, I thought it was great and I know something.
Well, we have time for one more question. Oh, boy. Hands go up. All right, there were 3 hands. We'll take all 3 of the questions, but that's really going to be it. First, the gentleman right there. I saw.
I was going to ask if you guest conduct in a foreign country. I don't know to what extent you're a linguist. The problems we discussed earlier, complicated,
we're talking about a question of language. I'm conducting week after next in Helsinki, Finland. I don't speak Finnish, but I speak enough Italian, like everyone else does, as a musical language. There's nothing I can't say and get across without the language. I don't need the language. The only thing I need really in terms of language is numbers. I need numbers and letters so I can say where to begin. After that, you can get away with, you don't need it. You really don't. I can conduct a whole rehearsal here in the United States without saying anything in English if I wanted to. It is, and if you're a good conductor, you can communicate it without having to talk a lot. And the things you're going to tell, you want it shorter, you say staccato. It's Italian. You want it to be louder, you say più forte, or softer, meno forte, or if you want it to be on the string, alla corda. I mean, you know all the words because that's part of our education, and they're universal.
Yes.
I'd like to know, when you walk into a concert hall, before you start a series of concerts, is there certain music that you can't play in the concert because of the size, or because the music won't sound right in there?
Yes, absolutely. Question is, as I'm sure you all heard, yes, a concert hall does affect the music you perform in it. I'll give you an example. We do forte piano stuff at Fisher Hall. All right. Fisher Hall's a big hall, 2,700 seats. You can hear a forte piano everywhere in Fisher Hall. It's a very clear hall. A little sound, a recorder is heard all over that hall. No problem hearing it. In another hall, let's say a more reverberant hall, at Carnegie Hall, it's much more difficult to hear a forte piano. I'm not saying one hall is better than the other. They're just different properties. Our hall here is a wonderful hall, Kaufman Auditorium, with very bright. If you play very loud music here, you got to be real careful because it can hurt the ears of the audience. It's a small stage and a small hall. You're not going to put on huge pieces on the stage. Yes, the size of the hall and the acoustical properties of the hall affect what you can or can't do. Absolutely.
Yes.
Do you vary your interpretation or technique when you're in a recording session as opposed to a live concert?
I don't vary the interpretation at a recording session, no. I do sometimes vary the technique because for cleanliness' sake. I may subdivide something, in other words, give a few extra beats at a recording session that I wouldn't do at a concert. Because at a concert, I'm trying to interpret the music. I'm not trying to become a policeman. I'm not trying to make sure everything's absolutely perfectly together. I'm trying to make a performance, make an interpretation. At a recording session, I'm trying to make a performance and make an interpretation, but I want everything to be together, for sure, because it bothers me when it's not a year later if I hear it on the radio. So I do vary the technique a little bit at a recording session. I must say you vary your technique according to the hall, too. I recorded recently in London in a hall that was very live, and I did slightly slower tempos than I would have done if the hall were slightly drier. It just happened. I couldn't help it.
I will break my own rule and ask one more question, if that's
Sure,
all right.
of course.
Yes.
When is this series musically
We do it Sunday afternoons. We start, I don't know. We start December, I think. If you want, if you call the Performing Arts Department here, they'll send you a brochure. Just say, you want to know about Musically Speaking, they'll send it. Because it hasn't begun. We're doing 3, I think 1 in December. What I do is I talk about a specific aspect of music, whether it be orchestration, tone color. I like to go through reviews and say, this reviewer says that the instrumentalists play with lots of color in the sound. And then I think to myself, how many people know what that means? If you don't know what that means, then you come to Musically Speaking, I'll teach you what it means. That's what I do. And then I play full pieces as well. So I do regular full concerts, except I talk for about 20 minutes and therefore do one less piece than I would normally do in a concert. I love doing them. I do them in Seattle, too. And it's a very exciting series for me. Here at the Y, yeah. Oh, it's listed in the program. Great. Thank you all.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
We'll see you in April with Leonard Slatkin and Michael Tilson Thomas. And good night.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.